My name is Janice. I am 45 years old, and I have spent most of my life carrying a pain that no words can fully describe. I never had brothers or sisters. I grew up close to my parents, and when I became a mother myself, I thought I finally understood what real love meant. Her name was Carol. She was only 5 months old when they took her from me. At that time, I lived with my husband and his parents. They never accepted me. They believed I was not good enough for their son. They made sure I felt it every single day. When my husband died in an accident, their hatred grew even stronger. I was alone, grieving, and vulnerable. One afternoon, while I was at work, my mother-in-law came to the house. When I returned home, Carol was gone. Her clothes, her toys, every small piece of her life had disappeared. The next day, they told me to forget her. They had given my baby up for adoption without my knowledge, without my permission, without even looking me in the eye. I cried. I begged. I went to the police, but no one listened. No one helped. The world simply moved on, and I was left behind, empty and broken. Since that day, I never stopped searching. I never stopped hoping. A mother always knows when her child is still alive, and deep inside my heart, I knew Carol was out there somewhere. I worked as a cleaner, taking care of houses and elderly people to keep myself busy. The work was hard, but stillness was harder. Every night before closing my eyes, I whispered the same words into the dark. Carol, I will find you. Years passed. I eventually moved in with my son Anthony and his wife Sophia. But that house never felt like home. Sophia was cold and resentful. She said I made her nervous, that I controlled everything, that I did not belong there. One evening, after another painful argument, she told me to leave. Anthony stood beside her in silence, his eyes fixed on the floor. My heart shattered. I packed a small bag, a few clothes, some money, and the one thing I would never leave behind, Carol's baby bracelet. It was the only piece of my daughter I still had. I sat on a bench near a bus stop that night, lost and exhausted. With nowhere to go, I quietly asked God to show me the way. Then I heard a voice behind me. A man named Richard asked if I was all right. He sat beside me, and we talked for a while. He told me about a house nearby that needed a cleaner. He gave me an address and said to go there in the morning and mention his name. I thanked him and slept on that bench under the open sky. The next morning, I went to the address. A young woman opened the door. Her name was Sydney, and she had warm, kind eyes. When I told her Richard had sent me, she smiled and said he was her father. I froze for just a moment, but I accepted the job. Sydney talked to me every morning while I made her breakfast. She told me her father had raised her alone since she was a baby, that her mother had died when she was very young. The sadness in her voice reached straight into my heart. I understood that kind of loss in a way most people never could. One afternoon, while cleaning Richard's office, I found a small family photograph. Sydney was a baby in his arms. I turned it over, and my hand began to shake. The date written on the back was the same year Carol was born. I tried to push the thought away. It was impossible. It had to be a coincidence. But the feeling would not leave me alone. The next morning, Sydney handed me a small gift. She said she had kept it since she was a baby, but never knew where it came from. It was a bracelet. My heart stopped beating. The bracelet looked exactly like the one in my bag. I went to my room, closed the door, and placed both bracelets in my trembling hands. They were identical. The same design. The same word. Carol. I could not breathe. I held both bracelets and prayed for the truth. Then came a knock at my door. It was Richard. He sat down and told me something he had been carrying for years. He said Sydney was adopted. He had taken her in when she was only 5 months old. The adoption papers had come from a small town through his lawyer. He had never met the mother. I could barely speak. I told him everything. I showed him the bracelet. His eyes widened, and for a long moment neither of us said a word. Then he said, "If this is true, it changes everything." I looked at him through my tears and said, "I don't care about everything. I just want her." He took a slow breath and nodded. "Then we will find the truth together." We arranged a DNA test, and the days that followed were the longest of my life. I prayed every hour. Every minute felt like a year. Then one morning, Richard walked into the room holding an envelope. He opened it, read it in silence, and looked up at me, with eyes full of emotion. He said my name softly. "Janice, it's true." Before I could say anything, Sydney walked into the room. She looked at us, then at the paper in Richard's hands. He gave it to her without a word. Her hands trembled as she read. She looked up at me and asked what it meant. I stepped toward her and said the words I had rehearsed in my heart for 15 years. "It means I am your mother." The room went completely silent. Sydney dropped the paper, covered her mouth, and then she came to me. She walked straight into my arms, and I held her. After 15 years of searching, of hoping, of whispering her name into the dark, I was finally holding my daughter. We cried together for a long time, while Richard stood quietly beside us, his eyes full of tears. Sydney turned to him and said, "You will always be my father too." In the weeks that followed, I told Sydney stories about her real father, about the life that had been stolen from us both. We laughed, we cried. We filled in the years that had been taken away. Richard later told me he wanted us to build a new life together, and I said yes. Not because life had become easy, but because love had finally found its way back to me after all the years of darkness. I thank God every single morning for what I have been given. Family is not only made by blood, it is made by love, by forgiveness, and by the stubborn courage to keep hoping even when hope seems foolish. Sometimes we must lose absolutely everything before we can find what truly matters. I take Sydney's hand, I look into her eyes, and I smile. After everything we have both been through, we are finally home.